Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing okay. I was flipping through some books and I figured that I might film a systems that worked for me in 2024 video. I think I did float this as a concept and you guys were into it, but I feel inclined this afternoon. I don't want to spend too long talking, but I feel like it's going to be unavoidable. So depending on the length of the video, make sure you have a drink or something, I guess, and just be prepared for a rambly one. This is not going to be a concise pro-con list. It's going to be like a meandering, let's look at stuff. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's good company. So I'm not going to cover all of the systems that I worked through in 2024. There was a little bit of a spring spiral. There is always a bit of a spring spiral. And I don't want to cover all of those. I just don't feel like it's necessary. A couple of them I really didn't learn anything from. It was just repeating patterns. And I don't know that they're productive to talk about, apart from acknowledging that we're human. We do repeat patterns, and every year I just try a little bit harder to do less of that. What I do want to talk about is the systems that led me to other systems, and the ones that got me to where I am now, starting 2025. Every year my goal is just to move book less. It's to have slightly more consistency than the year before, and I do feel like that was successful in 2024. 2023 was absolute chaos, but in 2024 I had 8 months consistent in a couple of systems. I was in personal size rings for 4 months, I was in A5 rings for 4 months, and then I did have 1 month in this funny travelers experiment that I think is interesting, so we'll talk about it. Which really only leaves 3 months or so unaccounted for, which isn't too bad. And if nothing else, at the end of it, I do have this massive chunk of pages to look back on, and I have my A5 binders that are very consistently kept, very meticulously kept. I have a lot of very concrete memories to reference. And as someone whose main goal with these kinds of notebooks is to keep my memories, I have a lot of long-term chronic stuff that sucks, and my memory is very poor as a result. It's gotten a lot worse in the last couple of years, especially maybe even the last 6 months has gotten worse. It sucks. So my notebook systems are part coping mechanism and part sort of compulsion, part hobby, part passion. I do really enjoy the process, but it is also very fundamental for me as a way of life, I suppose, a way of preserving my memories, because otherwise I just don't have them. All I have is gaping black space. So that's I guess the brief preview, or the brief explanation, is that it's all to look back on later. That might be a conclusion that I took too long to come to, is this idea of like, I just need it to be relatively consistent so that I can look at it again. I think I always knew why I wanted to do it, but I had a really hard time keeping on top of anything. And I feel like that is something that I've really gotten better at this year. So we'll have a quick flip through this one. Obviously this is my 4 or 5 months in Franklin Covey compact / personal size rings. It was working pretty well. I'm not going to go into the details of how each system worked unless it's relevant to how it evolved, if that makes sense. Obviously you guys are mostly familiar with these pages anyway. You know how I was using them. And part of me does kind of miss personal size rings. Obviously, like, this is not an insubstantial amount of pages. I stuck with it for a really decent amount of time. And I think it was successful. I think it was a really productive period of memory keeping and sort of like cataloging of stuff. The downside I found was that the maintenance was really annoying to me. It wasn't like it was loads of maintenance, but it was enough that I found it like inconvenient, and I found it a bit sort of like a bit mundane to keep up with. When you print personal size pages on an A4 sheet, you can get 2 on a page, and then you have to cut around the edges, and it's quite a lot of paper to be cutting. I found that really annoying eventually. I just got bored of having to do that all the time. And then, like, God forbid you have a day where like your pages are not the complete same size because you're using a questionable supermarket guillotine, and like you've got like a little bit of extra or less room and your holes don't line up across the board, and you know, if you're anything of a perfectionist, which I am working harder not to be, that gets really frustrating. Like, it wasn't too bad. Obviously, I mean, I have enough pages to show for my time here, but I did start to have periods where I was like, I did not want to keep printing pages. I did not want to have to put in the upkeep. And that's not ideal. You don't want those kinds of barriers, especially if you're trying to set yourself up for like long-term success. So this did work. I did like it. I feel like I could collect enough stuff here. The pages were just enough, sorry, I'm real stuttery today. The pages were just big enough to give me enough room to collect photographs, receipts, like, I was gonna say photographs again, quotes, and a lot of commonplacing. I was collecting music, stickers, there was room for like everything. And at this point I was still writing things by hand as well. That kind of evolved as the year went on, but looking at this, it's all neater than I remember it being. It wasn't a bad space, but it did have some amount of upkeep that was not always sustainable feeling to me on a personal level. And when I say sustainable in this video, I'm probably not talking about environmental sustainability, but more about personal sustainability, whether I think it's a habit I can keep up with long term, just to clarify. So, I mean, it was a very good way of working. I like all the layering that was going on. It's just that the upkeep became tedious, that's the word, it became so tedious. And that started to become a real barrier for me. As soon as the fun is kind of like leaking out of it, that's when you know you're in trouble. That's when I know I'm in danger. And that did happen to me in April. Where are we here? April. Here we go. So there's actually still an overwhelming amount of pages after that. But here's April. And I think maybe it was the end of April and that's why. But basically I got to the end of April, beginning of May, and I was like, do you know what? I'm sick of it. I'm sick of doing this. And that's when I had my spring spiral, which we won't focus too much on, as I said. I did manage to document a lot of the year. Obviously my birthday was in there, Luke's birthday was in there, Canada, there was a bog, my auntie's wedding was in there, and then I have another wedding later on, and I have New York as well. So I did manage to document a lot of the really important parts of the year in these pages. As well as a lot of the more insignificant, quieter parts of the year. I reference all of it, to be honest with you. Like, these are very obvious memory keeping, it's travel scrapbooking, but I also do it to keep my daily stuff too. I've got receipts fading in here. Thankfully I did start photocopying receipts as time went on, because that one is on its way out. Here is something that gave me a lot of grief with personal size. I had this like comically large postcard and it just was not, I photocopied it to fit it in, but it wasn't really ideal still. And then the other annoying thing about personal size rings was archiving in the Franklin Covey binder. I love that it can hold like a year worth of pages for me. But the fact that it's only 2 prongs is like, that's not ideal. There's a lot of bits coming up where they're just sliding around all over the place because they've only got 1 loop through them, whereas obviously in rings you've got 6. So when it comes to layering up and then having to archive, it's not the most ideal. It wasn't too bad, it's not the end of the world, but it is a small grievance, I suppose. When it comes to archiving personal size pages, beggars really can't be choosers. You guys will remember that part of the trouble I had was finding a suitable archive binder. It was really the bane of my life for a while there. And I do still think that the Franklin Covey binder was the best one I found, but it's still not 100% for me, especially because flipping pages over the tall rings is not the easiest. Here are all my bog book pages. That's why there's so much extra paper left to go. It's all my bog book stuff. And I will say personal size worked really well for commonplacing. Had a good system going there. But then I got to a point where I was like, is it necessary to print 20 pages of an article? I don't know. That's something I'm still considering at the moment. Like, this is all just one article, and I do have to wonder if it's the best use of space, even though it was a very, very cool article and I'm glad to have it. I'm like, don't know if that's necessary per se. Here is August, and we will look at this also. I think it's August. Oh, so yeah, here's May. Questionable. This is the end of April. These are my last few pages in the personal rings before I dropped it for like 6 or so months, I guess, or maybe it was like 4 months. Had some TV shows and then some blank pages. I had these autism inserts I made, but I think they're mostly blank. I wasn't using them yet. And then towards the back, I do have a August pages. So when I went to Canada, oh, I have my first half of the year in book reviews. I read some really good books last year, actually. A productive reading, yeah. And these are nice to look back on. So then August, oh, July. So here I started typing my pages up, actually. I'll talk about these first and then we'll loop back because the Traveler's Notebook experiment feeds directly into this. But let's have a quick look because we're here. So I was experimenting more with typing up my pages in July. Oh, this was the beginning of July. So I was actually consistent for a month more than I thought because I thought I had August in here. I didn't realize I had July. So actually 2024 was not that messy. I was pretty good. And I didn't realize that actually. What a nice surprise. Here's August. So I went to Canada and I did document that here. These were my travel journal pages, and I've got stuff falling out all over the place here because of that issue with the rings being like just 2 of them. Here I was also photocopying my receipts to preserve them, again in that spirit of everything is to be looked at again later. I know there's that field note saying of like, I don't journal for later, I journal for now, or I don't write things down for later, I write them down for now. And that's not the exact phrasing, but it's something like that. That's the spirit of it. And I think that is true for me, but it's also not. I really need it for later as well. That's a big part of my motivation. Because all of this stuff, when I look at, I've talked about this before definitely, but when I look at the pictures and when I look at the little scraps, I can like feel the time period they come from, if you know what I mean. When I look at these, I feel like I can really unlock those memories. And if I didn't have them to look at, I just can't in the same way. There's nothing in my actual head to pull from, or at least not without the right prompts. And I think these pages and the way that I had these things set up, it did really help. Like when I look at these, I feel like I can still smell the cinema. Like I know that's so silly, but I can feel the aircon from when I was sat at this table taking this photo. And that's what my books are for. It's just so that I can actually access those things. Like I can almost remember the taste of this drink when I look at this photo, but that's not something that I could think about otherwise. And that's why it all feels so important for me. I can definitely smell the hotel room. And I can remember this evening. Like it's really, I don't know, it's I don't want to spend too long like talking about that kind of thing and like really like waxing nostalgia, but like that's what I do it for. And my goal has always been at least semi-consistency. And I think that's why it's interesting to talk about at this point of the new year, because I've been thinking about it again recently, and kind of stitching together the systems from last year and thinking about how I want to approach the new year. Like I just like these are good, you know, like all of this and the earlier pages too. Like I can remember a lot of these things because I have the references, and that's what it's all for. So this was all New York, and personal, as I said, is nice because I feel like I do have just enough room to fit a lot of these things in. Oh, see, this one's not even attached, which is not ideal. Here I have a wedding invite from my friend's wedding. Like, I like that I could fit that in there. And then we're coming up on the end of August here, and I have a postcard, some little bits, and then I have these references. I don't actually know what these are. Oh, it's about my health stuff, so we'll skip those. But that was my time in personal rings last year. There is a considerable amount of it. I am pretty proud of that. It just, the maintenance gets tedious. I just don't always enjoy the maintenance. Here is all the pages. It is like, if I push on the rings, like she is full. I did manage to fill an archive binder, which if you had told 2023 Megan that I would manage that, I don't know if she would believe you. So I'm taking this as a win. After this, I did go through a bit of a chaotic period, as I said. Eventually, I got to a point where I made, in June. So by the time we got to June, which means I think I only lost a bit of April. Oh no, it'd be May. I lost May. May is the month I lost, which really is the start of spring in the UK. I think May is when it's properly getting warm. So I lost May. She's gone. Don't know what happened to her. Don't know what I did. But June, I was working on this experiment, and this was my first digital booklet that I made. This was my first attempt at typing up my pages. I can't remember how this occurred to me. I think I was working on one of my zines, and I was kind of just like, okay, what if this, but as notebook? And I gave it a go, and I'm not unhappy with how it turned out, but I just don't know that it was for me. Obviously, when you make a zine out of your notebooks, you can't layer things up in the same way. I could have gone back in after I got it printed and stuck extra flaps, but I didn't. I think I was unhappy with not having as much control over the printing. I know for a fact I was unhappy with the trimming on the edges of the pages. Looking at it again now, I'm like, it's not really the end of the world, but I do go through phases where I'm more and less perfectionist, I think. And we can have a look. It was pretty cool. This one was a fun one because I was able to share all the pages with my patrons as I went. They were pages where I tried to be more general with how I talked about things and less like intensely personal, so I was able to share stuff, and my patrons were able to read it and see my process. And I remember that being quite a fun period. I don't know if it was actually that fun for the patrons, but I thought it was kind of cool. I had this index page for all the stuff that's in the book, and then I had the font information, and I just thought it was really cool. It was a good experiment for me. Like, this is, I think, one of the experiments from last year where I was like, okay, I was actually onto something here. Like, I was cooking. And I liked it. I even managed to digitize the gold foil dot. So it was a good experiment, and this also is part of where I got all the layouts that I use now, and also where I started using the impact font for my pages, which carried over for the rest of the year. So this actually did work out really well. And it was just after this experiment that I went back to personal, and that's when I started typing the personal pages. So it's a direct response to this experiment. Because obviously when I was worried about the lack of control over printing, my solution was obviously to go back to printing personal pages. And that did work for a bit, but not long term in the way that I had hoped. The interesting thing about this is that I liked the space I had. I've always thought the Traveler's standard size space is awkward. It looks weird, it's so tall and skinny. But because it's partly an A4 size, in, I think, the height, sweats nervously, it's actually quite a good space. It's quite a good space. You get a lot of room. I was still doing that thing with the margin and then splitting it like 2/3 of the way down, and I like that. I could make my pictures pretty big. That was really nice. And to be honest, the quality of the printing is nice. It was just the trimming, which is something I've been thinking about recently, but I don't think it's relevant yet, so we'll leave it for now. To be honest, looking back at this after like months is nice, actually. I think it's not as bad as I thought. It can be really hard when you work on something for an entire month, and I did. I wrote every single day for a month. You can see the pages are going chronologically, and it's literally 4, 5, 6, 7 of the month. I was really dutiful about it. I wrote every day. And I think to have chipped away at it over such a period of time, every evening, and to have been really like focusing and controlling every aspect of it, I think when I first got it printed, it was really jarring to have had to really release that control and then see the outcome. But looking at it some months later with a less critical view, with less investment, it's really not as bad, I think, as I thought. It came out pretty cool. I remember watching this, oh my god. See, it's that thing again where I'm like looking at it and I'm like, oh, I remember that moment. I remember those evenings, and I would not have been able to place those in time otherwise. Here was my previous traveler's notebook experiment. There's a couple of photos there. I was probably talking about my thoughts on it, because that was what filled May, was the actual traveler's notebooks. But I think this was more productive for me. I got a playlist in there. I think that was the first time I dyed my hair purple. It's been purple ever since. Underneath. That's cool. Like, I look at this and I'm like, actually this was really good. No way was I playing this in June. I thought I started that way later than June. I still haven't beat the game. It's really hard. But I really love it. It's really good. Wow. Yeah, to be honest with you, like, some of this I forgot. Oh, The Killing, that was so good. Such a good show. See, I could always have come back in here and added stickers in the gaps. It was a possibility. I could have added extra layers. But I think it's that thing of having to work on it digitally and not be able to hold it for a full month was kind of throwing me off. This was a really good interview on the Hobonichi website. And I like the way the formatting worked out for this because of the room that the size gives you. Like, it is really cool. I don't know. I forgot how cool this was. When they came, I was so disappointed. I like looked at them briefly and talked about them in a video, and then I put them in my drawer. Haven't looked at them since, I don't think, really. Every now and then I pull it out, but it's actually kind of a lot cooler than I remember. Oh, and this was a parcel my friend sent me when she went to Japan. And I scanned it to be able to put it in my digital book, which is, again, pretty neat. Forgot about that. And my Tamagotchi, which I still don't have. I still don't have the monster one. I bought the DLC for my existing uni, but I managed to talk myself out of buying the monster edition case. I'll do it eventually because I do really like it. I do really want it, but it's just not been a priority cost-wise. But yeah, I also digitally at this time started working on a reference booklet that could be printed the same way. But as I say, I'm just not sure that not being able to hold it for a full month is the solution for me. And I'm not good enough at DIY or paper trimming to sew it together at home. Maybe I could learn. I just haven't felt this year like I've had the spoons for it, to be honest with you. So I do like outsourcing the printing, also because they have access to better quality printers than I do. But do you know what? This was actually cooler than I remembered. After this book, so then we had August in personal. And then September was in my A5 books, which you've seen a lot of recently, so apologies for whipping them out again. But I then jumped into this one for September. And why I think this is interesting is because throughout the course of the year, especially the spring and the summer, when I thought I was not doing so good, I felt like things were really hazy. And I felt like I had not managed to crack my resolution of being more consistent, and I felt like things were all over the place again. I was really stressed about it for a period there. I wrote that really dramatic blog post about being without a book, which I don't regret. That was how I felt at the time. It really did feel like I was lost in a sea, like I had nothing grounding me. Like it was quite scary. Like I don't like that. And that's the problem, I think, when one of your hobbies is also a very big coping mechanism for you. But I did find my way back, and eventually I was like, okay, what if my problem is that in the spring I always miss Hobonichi, and so I got to a point where I was like, okay, what if I started an A5 ring binder in the same way that I did my personal pages and my traveler's experiment, and I did it in A5, and I mocked up sort of like the Hobonichi layouts, and I gave myself the room that I like to play with in the Hobonichi A5, and that was how this happened. I just wanted the space, and that worked really well. So we can flip through these again, even though I've done it recently a lot. I'm pretty proud of my progress here. This was a really easy way for me to cut the maintenance aspect of Filofax down while retaining the space that Hobonichi gives me, and the ability to type and layer things digitally that my Traveler's Notebook experiment taught me. And I don't think I realised fully at the time, but it's a real unification of everything that I tested this year. Especially when you consider that the books I'm not talking about that happened in the middle are writing by hand in Traveler's Notebook booklets and also in A5 Hobonichi notebooks. and those are mostly what happened in the middle, apart from a couple of other like B6 messy bits. But it was all kind of because of that problem of like wanting the space but not wanting it to be overwhelming and needing it to be sustainable to me personally, and being able to control things and layer things and like all this stuff, and it all fed back into here. And this turned out really well. I felt like in A5 I had enough room to experiment and to really lay things out in a cool way. I could layer stuff up in the best way possible. The binders are easier to shop for than personal, which is often mislabeled as A6. It's a whole issue. And so it meant that I could fill a binder every 2 months, and I could see the pages, and like I could print them as I went or at the end of the week, but I didn't have to wait a month. And I could add stickers after. I could photocopy everything. I really took everything I learned and applied it. My index system is still the same as it's always been. And it was really ideal. I guess I won't flip through December's binder because you've seen it, but in December's binder too, I managed to put in some like Christmas cards at the end as well. Oops. So that was really cool. Like the amount of stuff that I could archive in A5 is just fantastic. Like the amount of Christmas, like, I don't know, being able to put a Christmas card in there is kind of mind-blowing to me. So that was really sick. It was really cool. Going into 2025, I did my first week in A5, and then last week I helped my brother move apartment or move flat in the UK, and I was a bit overwhelmed, not because of his move or anything to do with him. The moving went fine, he's good, but I think the last couple of months, like our entire family, like the three of us, and also some of our external family, like we were all just going through it on so many levels for like 4 months or 5 months. By December, all of us were fighting for our lives at once. Like there was a lot going on. Like I had my own issues, my dad had his own issues, Luke had his own issues. Some of my external family were dealing with stuff too, and it just like we were all trying to support each other at the same time. And it was just like a lot of it was out of our control as well, so it was just like waiting and hoping kind of stuff. I don't know if I imagine you have, but for those of you who have been through something similar when like there's just too much going on and you have no control over any of it, like it's a lot. So I think these A5 pages were a good coping mechanism for that in some respects. Now that we're in the new year, I just find I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I guess it's probably now that things are leveling back out and I'm leveling back out, I'm just like, I'm a bit tired. So I have kind of been working more in my A6 rings. They're not actually A6, I'll talk about them. We'll put this one to one side. I hate when I set up a nice backdrop for the video and then I start moving stuff around and I'm like, oh god, I hope it still looks nice. It looks like chaos normally when I go back and check. Okay, so then what happened was January, things started to settle down and I was feeling overwhelmed, as I said. I had already been using this as like a side book, just like something fun on the side. And what it is an A7 binder inside an A6 Hobonichi cover. This is the Gentle Stripes one I bought last year, which is just one of those ones again where it's like I never regret buying the things I do because I often come back around to them. So it's nice. I don't have a clear cover on this because I like the texture. It's made of wool, and it's kind of like a nice, almost like felt. The charms I got from the bracelet I made in New York. I took them off and I added them onto a keychain, and it's really cute, big fan. So those are those. And then what we have going on in here is an A7 binder, and then I made the pages because I can never do anything properly. So the pages are a completely made up size, but they fit in the binder and also in the A6. I'll put the measurements in the description. If I forget, please remind me. They're actually available on Patreon if you're interested. They're not in the shop because it's not a full set of pages, it's just the bare minimum. But I have been using it and experimenting with it and it's kind of fun. So originally I set this up just to see if I could, because I was like, there must be a way, or while using A5 Filofax, to loop Hobonichi back into it. And this was the method I devised. And it was definitely my most successful attempt so far. I was using it just as like a scrapbook kind of thing, like smaller thoughts. There's like some recipes in here, some coping mechanisms, my dream journal. Basically anything that was kind of too small or not worth creating a whole A5 page around, I put in here. And I just had like a few pages for the longest time while maintaining my A5 books. As January started and I was feeling overwhelmed, I kind of thought I was feeling less inclined towards the upkeep. It was when I came back from helping Luke move, and I sat down and I opened Procreate to catch up on my pages for the week, and I just felt so overwhelmed by all the space. And that was kind of a sad feeling, actually. It was like I had this like little bittersweet moment where I was like, oh no, because I was looking at all the gaps and all the space, and I was like, I just don't feel up to it right now. I just don't feel like I have enough thoughts to fill it. And so I was like, that's fine, I'll just make some notes in my small rings and I can always come back to it, and it's not an issue, like it's okay. So that's what I did at the start of the year. I just started filling these pages quite lightheartedly, just keeping some notes so that I could backfill my A5 if I needed to. Eventually I got to a point where I was like, I'm actually enjoying this. And then I was talking to my dad and I was like, I don't know if this is like a cry for help, but like, I think I'm feeling this more than the A5 rings now. And he was like, well, that's not the end of the world, like, and I was like, okay, true. It's always good to be humbled by your dad. And then I was like, okay, I'll just give it a go, like it's really not that deep, I'll just see how I get on. So I made the calendar, filled that up, and then I adapted my weekly pages to fit, and so I have these little tiny weeks that are filled out exactly the same way as they were in A5, just a lot smaller. And it's quite nice, actually. It's a lot less work to fill every week. I'm still media tracking on the vertical weeklies, and it's not bad, it's just less. And I think at the moment in January, because January sucks every year, this is my self-care January this year, I guess. It's just letting myself have less, but still getting all the important stuff down, the stuff that I enjoyed tracking last year. So the little bits in my weeks with the photos, the media tracking that I got in the A5 and in the Traveler's Experiment. And then like cinema tickets still fit in here. I did see Nosferatu, I did love it. This one from my moon calendar, and then I added some stickers on top because it snowed. And I've just been experimenting with seeing how much of my practice I can keep the same but smaller. So I still have my mood boards. This is a flyer I found. This is a card someone gave me. And I'm just seeing how it goes. I think I'm not too worried, to be honest with you, because I do really like this. And also because if I do really have to, I can use these notes to backfill the A5 if that's where I get to. And if I don't get to doing that, it's also fine because the A5 folders are contained. They had 4 months in them, they're full, like those 4 months were complete and they were wrapped up and tidy. I started a new month in this one and I can archive this folder the same. And so long as I don't have more than like 4 or 5 archives at the end, I don't mind too much. And I think that's part of why I wanted to make this video, because I've just come to the conclusion that I think chasing a permanent, consistent archive is kind of a futile effort in some ways. I think we're always going through a lot of things, and there are always going to be times in my life when I need more and less space. And I think at least now that I have a system that's working, like typing things up and printing things out, and layering things and going back and adding stickers and being able to look at them is like, I think that's what I need. And I think so long as I don't forget that, so long as I don't go back to like a bound book with a pen, I think I'll be okay. Like I think I'll be able to maintain it. We don't need to cry for help. Like there's no red flags until I start picking up bound books again, basically, I think. Just because this way of working is so efficient for my main motivations, like my goals in memory keeping, so I'm not too fussed. So this is kind of, it's smaller than personal, but it's kind of a more interesting space, I think. It feels less awkward than the space you have with personal. I have some drawings in here, some photos. I'm experimenting with printing bigger photos and smaller photos, and I'm just gonna see how it goes. I like it. So this is an A7 binder. I showed this to my patrons last week, so I can't remember what I've shown everyone else, but basically this is an A7 binder that I cut like an inch off. to make it fit in this cover because this cover is a bit tight. For the colour versions of the Hobonichi covers, the intact A7 binders fit without issue, but this one is a tiny bit smaller and so it doesn't. But basically when these binders are intact and I haven't cut anything off them, the pages fit in them for archiving without any overhang, which is absolutely perfect. So they're basically like a pocket-sized page, but there's a bit of extra room, in the same way that I added extra room to my personal pages, except this one doesn't have another name, it's just Megan's size pages, I suppose. I did go to Ryman's yesterday briefly, and I realised that these fit inside the pocket-sized Filofaxes, and I was like, oh, I didn't realise I was making something so reliable. So that's also really helpful. If I ever wanted to use a pocket-sized Filofax cover, I could. Otherwise, I can keep using the Hobonichi covers, which is great because I finally found a way to fit Hobonichi into my system without it being impossible for me to upkeep long term. I finally managed to crack it, I think. So that's fun. And if I do start missing the A5, I can just go back to A5 in February or March, and then I can just keep using this little book as a side thing again, and it will be perfect. So in conclusion, that's what happened last year. This is how I'm starting this year. I hope that was somewhat coherent and interesting. I'm not really sure if I had a point. I just think it's cool to see how it all pulled together and how they all overlapped and like wove into each other. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm in Wales this weekend, which is really nice. Haven't been for a while. Can't wait to see my family. And I might film that or I might not, but we'll see. I wanted to make this for you. Let me know if you had something similar last year. Did you go on a similar journey? Did everything pull together, or did you realise you were in the complete wrong space? I am always curious to know how other people's systems are evolving. I feel like I made really good progress last year, so that's nice. Okay, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.